Hi, thanks for tuning in. It's Joe Simhart here again. And 2 days ago, I posted a short piece on Peter Thiel and his ideas of the Antichrist and what I think it's all about, which is him casting out a net and seeing if he can form some kind of feedback and a coalition that might come to some sort of a movement that some people call a cult in order to help influence the powers that be. And since he has some direct influence on the most powerful government in the world, it's a good idea to take a look at what the hell he's doing. So I wanted to just extend that a little further into what I think is going on and why there's a lot of error and it can lead to a lot of destructive thinking because of this kind of error that's going on in the way he approaches all of this. So I'm calling this Thiel's speculative religion. So he's speculating about AI and language and government and economics and how that's going to influence the future. Carl Schmitt, the Nazi intellectual that helped shape how governance would work under the Nazi regime, seems to have influenced Thiel and still does, maybe more so the ideas of Girard, his ideas of mimetics and desire and how that leads to scapegoatism and all that. Anyway, you can look him up, Rene Girard. And this seems to be a consistent influence on Thiel's ideation. I don't know a lot about Girard. I've read about his connection to the deconstructionists like Derrida and others, and how they see that language and how we shape language can shape society, and that there may or may not be any available truth, so we have to make stuff up, kind of like Plato's noble lie. It's better to have something than nothing, and so if we can shape some sort of a construction, whether it's the Gospels of Christianity or the Muslim Quran or the Mormon scriptures, the Book of Mormon, we apparently need something rather than nothing. So anarchy is not great. It's better to have religion, and I think this is why Thiel is so interested in the religion of the future. I think he sees that modernism has kind of evaporated a lot of what we consider to be truth in religion. And truth is something else. It's something that we shape and we intuit from how we approach our lives in the universe. But truth is also kind of a language game when it comes to theology. And I think that's where Thiel is going with his ideas. So I'm going to go back to Wittgenstein, and I've quoted him before, and he just says that philosophy is a battle against the bewitchment of our intelligence by means of our language. So we have to see what people are saying, how they're saying it, where they're getting their ideas from. And maybe Girard is correct. If our language is interesting enough, if it's charismatic enough, people begin to mime it, they imitate it in their desire to be like what they think we're saying, to be like the map that we're imposing on the territory. And, imitation is flattery, and people whose ideas are imitated in a cult following, feel flattered. The mirror-hungry hero, the mirror-hungry cult leader, and the hero-hungry follower is now imitating the language of the leader. In fact, in some cults, you can see, for instance, Americans that join the Hare Krishna begin to sound a lot like their leader and have a mock Indian accent, for instance. It gets that crude in some cases. But so let me get to this idea that what I think is going on is a kind of eisegesis. For instance, with Thiel, he's coming up with a personal religion. In other words, private revelation is what the Catholics would call it, which doesn't necessarily comport very well with exegesis, which what we know about the basis of a scripture or a language game or whatever you want to call that sort of thing. For instance, you can do an exegesis on the meaning of Alice in Wonderland, and lots of people have tried that in many different ways, and some are better than others. Martin Gardner did an excellent job in the annotated Alice of Lewis Carroll in this text, which is the definitive edition, which I really enjoy reading, and we get a good idea of the basis and the influence and why Lewis Carroll wrote what he did in Alice in Wonderland in the context of the day or the times that Lewis was writing this. We could do the same things with the Christian Gospels by reading something like The Birth of the Messiah by Raymond Brown, 1979 era, and it's been updated. He's looking at just the infancy Gospels and Luke and Matthew in 700 pages here and breaking them down in an exegesis so that we don't, if we pay attention to proper exegesis, we won't sway too far in our private interpretation and eisegesis, which has happened thousands of times. You have various interpretations of the gospel, like with Reverend Moon and the Moonies and his divine principle, which is pure eisegesis. There's not much good exegesis going on. In other words, it's not reliable in terms of its connection to the original sources and to the original history, what we have of it. So I'm thinking that Peter Thiel is wandering into weird territory, and we almost always do when we go too deeply into theology, go too deeply into the origins of the universe without treading carefully. We end up with really weird theories in science, which you have to correct later on. And the same thing happens in our self-stories, in our cultures, when we develop a scripture and we start adding to it. For instance, in the Jewish tradition, it's called midrash, and a lot of the midrash is kind of weird. There's also midrash in the Christian tradition, like the infancy stories that came much later in gospels that were rejected, non-canonical. In other words, they were eisegesis. They weren't really relevant to the spirit and the rigor of the earliest documents, the writings of Paul and the four gospels that we have. In other words, the operatic or noble lie, if you want to call it that, of Plato, it begins to even get more weird, and it goes way off the rails. Much like some of the modern cults have gone way off the rails of what we call normative Christianity, whether you look at the Jehovah's Witness or the Mormon version and the thousands of others out there. So I think that Theo is moving into that new language game, trying to get to the essence of what we are as human beings, what's going to happen to us when we reflect on ourselves through AI, which we're just learning. And I think from what I've seen, the closer we get to that, or we pretend to get to that ultimate mind of God, or whatever you want to call it, the purpose of the universe, we get more midrash-like, we get a little more crazy sounding, we get more schizophrenic. And when that happens, then we develop a persecution complex when people start to criticize us and point out where we're wrong about our ideation. And it can lead to things like, the Inquisitions, for instance, which became murderous, causing tens of thousands of persecutions and killings in Europe while that was going on. So I think we have to be careful with our language, with how we approach information, and with not believing too quickly some new fancy ideas that are put out there by by billionaires who seem to think they know more than they do, and maybe some of their ideas are approaching a kind of a schizophrenic universe rather than one which is more pragmatic and available, which is what I think the founding fathers in the United States wanted. They wanted us to move toward a pragmatic, more perfect union, and to work this out sensibly with the way the government was set up, and all of that seems to have gone askew lately, and we're no longer following that pragmatic spirit that the founders, I believe, wanted us to have. So anyway, I think that Thiel's speculative religion begins to border on kind of a schizophrenic view of the universe and of where we're going as a human race. So I'd suggest to be careful with it. He may correct himself in the future. I don't know. But, like Proverbs 12:1 says, he who resists correction is stupid or like a beast. So thank you very much for listening again. I just wanted to add a little bit more to this way of looking at Thiel's new ideas, and we'll have to see where it goes. Until next time.